This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show. Happy Independence Day. Happy 4th of July. This is our first annual Independence Day special with our very popular returning guest, John Zmirak. Whenever I hear anyone else say, first annual, I know it's just an aspiration. Like, why are you even telling us? Tell us next year. Tell us when it's the second annual. It's like when you go to a restaurant, it's like established 2019. Go, that doesn't give me confidence, right? If you were established in 1947, I'm like, whoa. But when you say established 2019, you're just reminding me that you're new and unproven. So my aspiration is that we do a 4th of July special every year because today is a great day. It is a great celebration, not only for the United States, but for the world. Because Independence Day, to me, is really about the heart, not just for me, it is about what is at the heart of the Declaration principle. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are endowed by their Creator with ... inalienable rights, that every human person has an inviolable dignity, beauty, and worth. Angus, who listens to the show, says, you say inviolable dignity, beauty, and worth all of the time. The only reason I have this podcast is to sneak that in all of the time. And the 4th of July is what we're celebrating. We're celebrating human dignity, peace, a political community made up of equals, where we work together rationally, where we seek to minimize violence in the life of our community, in the political life of our community. And, it is 4th of July, and it's hot, and so you're looking for a movie. A lot of families go to the movie theaters on the 4th of July to escape the heat. Now, I'm going to tell you to go see this movie to celebrate 4th of July. If you're going to download a movie and stay in your big home with your big screen TV, today you need to watch Divided Hearts of America. You should have watched that movie already. It's my movie with Benjamin Watson and company, where we seek to find the source of unity in America, which is our Declaration principle. And we seek to understand what's causing our division, which are those ideologies that have denied that dignity: slavery, segregation, abortion, So if you're going to stay at home and you haven't seen the Divided Hearts of America, today you push the air conditioner up, you go see Divided Hearts of America. But if not, you need to go to the theaters and see Lin-Manuel's In the Heights. Now, a lot of people think, isn't that like some sort of leftist propaganda? No, it is a beautiful film that really is the celebration of the greatness of America. I saw it with my family last night. I adored the film, as did my 9-year-old. She's the artsy one. My 7-year-old said, quote, "I hated it. I didn't know what it was about." My 13 and 14-year-old sons were like, they couldn't admit that they liked a musical. 13 and 14-year-old boys probably aren't going to admit that they liked a musical, but I think they liked it. I loved it. My wife, she thought the music was too much like Hamilton. But anyway, I loved it. It's from the team that brought me, 3 of my favorite films. Crazy Rich Asians. I love that film because it's kind of my life. I married into a family like that, kind of. And, I love that. And then Moana and Hamilton. So I would say go see In the Heights. It's about, the greatness of America and how America sheltered people from all over the world. And there is a push for the DREAM Act, which I support. I've talked to you people why I support the DREAM Act. We know that we have a permissive immigration policy. We permit the exploitation of migrants in the underground economy. That's like the deal. So children shouldn't be the victim of that deal. I would highly recommend that you go. I should talk to John Zmirak about this. John and I don't always see eye to eye on immigration. And then before I invite John on, I just want to tell you why I love America. What is my experience? What is it about America that makes us so special that we tried to deny? I just saw this video that I'm going to put in the show notes. I'm going to try to get her on the show. Yeonmi Park escaped North Korea as a 13-year-old girl. She goes to Columbia, and she made a video recently where she said that woke culture in our universities, our elite universities, is crazier than North Korea. She's right. She's right. She says the problem with American kids is that they don't have problems. That's their problem. And she tells a story about how a woke white kid, looked this woman who fled North Korea as a 13-year-old girl across the Gobi Desert, suffered horribly. Her father was killed. This woke millennial white kid looks this Korean woman in the face, again, who fled North Korea for her life, and began to cry because he said she mispronounced him. I'm so impressed how perfectly she speaks English. And this guy's crying because he says she didn't use his pronoun correctly. That is insane. But let me tell you why I love America. This is my experience of America. You know, it's sheltered, first of all, my wife's family, right? My father-in-law and mother-in-law fled communism. My father-in-law fled China after the fall, went to the University of Pennsylvania. Not too shabby, in the early 50s, graduated, became a successful producer, an editor, made movie trailers for some of the biggest movies of the 70s and 80s. My mother-in-law, who ate out of trash cans, hid for her life, was sheltered in a in a convent by Italian nuns till her father could get her to Hong Kong. Then they were homeless. She eventually comes to America, where she had a successful modeling career and is now a successful realtor in New York City and Honolulu. Wow, not too bad, right? And my in-laws, here's something special. My mother-in-law was much younger than my father-in-law. When they got married, he was like 41. She was 40. She was in her mid-20s. And he was very successful. So she thought they were going to have this great honeymoon. They were going to go to Paris or whatnot. But no, he surprised her. He took her to Old Town Williamsburg for their honeymoon, because he wanted to share with her the greatness of this country, its founding, this great country that sheltered them from certain death or living a life as slaves under communism in China. And so their honeymoon was at Old Town Williamsburg. Okay, meanwhile, you know, my grandfather, my dad's dad, was the children of immigrants from Germany and Poland. His father had been orphaned and came to this country. Then my grandfather, after surviving the Depression, went into the army and fought across the Pacific as an infantryman in World War II, and then went to Korea, and then at the Korean War and fought as an infantryman, and came home and lived a life working for Ford as a tool and die maker, the son of immigrants. And I've told this story once before on this podcast. When I look at my grandchildren, my children, I often think of this. We were never allowed to talk to my grandfather about the Korean War. We could talk to him about World War II, but we could never talk to him about the Korean War. And on his deathbed, I was crying. I was with him, and we drove from Chicago all the way to Mountain Home, Arkansas. And on his deathbed, I was with him, and, you know, less than an hour before he was going to pass. And I began to cry, and my Grandpa Jones said, you know, don't cry for me, Jason. If you must cry, I want you to think of all the young men that I saw die as a soldier. Think of them. They never had children or grandchildren. They never had a life. I had a whole life. I had a beautiful life. Cry for them. And being trained not to bring up Korea, I said to my grandfather, I said, all those young men you saw die around you in World War II, Grandpa? He said, yes, them. And the young American boys I saw die, and then he began to cry. the young American boys I saw die in Korea. And then my grandpa, who was very present at that moment, just began to look off and began to wail, began to cry, and said, "And all those Korean and Chinese boys." And then he said Chinese again, "And all those Chinese boys that they sent at us, so many died." And he cried. Now, my grandpa never knew that his posterity would be Chinese. How wild is that? I think about that all the time. You know, that's my grandpa. That's the generation of white men we're told to hate, you know? That's a great man, a great American, had no bigotry or no guile. We're free because of him. That's my America. My America is some of my best friends. I love people who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Christian. I even love a few Irish people. A few. And they love me. And you. We don't meet bigots. Where do you meet a bigot? Where are all of these bigots the woke culture's fighting? I'm sure they're out there. I actually met my first white supremacist in my life recently, and I should talk about that. There are a few people addled with bigotry, and we pity them. Who are these people crusading against? What America do they live in? You know, my America is where every man is the king of his castle, every woman is the queen of her home. Where we have equal dignity, we respect each other, we're free to worship God. Right? That is, we don't understand how now there are people encroaching on our freedoms. We need to whack them away. Back off. Back off. This wonderful Korean young woman said, "I was once a slave, Yeonomi Park. I got to get her on the show. I will never be a slave again," Yeonomi Park said. She goes, "Cancel me, demonetize me, deplatform me." A woman who escaped North Korea. She goes, "America, our founding fathers gave us all of this freedom." She celebrates, the video's in the show notes, celebrates our founding fathers. Now, of course, everyone who came here, it was history, right? We all know it. Cultures and civilizations colliding, the old world and new worlds. Really just old worlds and old worlds colliding. And the forces of history. And everyone who came here, they brought their bigotry, right? How do we have all these great Polish jokes? Jewish immigrants from Poland. Where'd all the Jewish joke comes from? Polish immigrants, right? So we have cultures that came here. We all came here with our baggage. We brought our baggage to this new country, and we had the Declaration of Independence surrounded with the beautiful frame of the Constitution that said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, but we had baggage. It takes us a while to get rid of our baggage. I'm not going to look at people who takes a while to get rid of their baggage. It is what it is. I just know the experience I had. You know, my grandpa, child of an orphan, thrown into a brutal world war, and then the Korean War, which probably, I know what he experienced was much worse there than even in World War II. Then got to live a great life working for Ford. My wife, children of immigrants fleeing tyranny, lived a life of privilege. As far as I see it, like summers were spent on the Queen Elizabeth II. My summers, I would get an inflatable raft with my friends. We'd blow it up. We'd buy it at Ben Franklin, and we would put it in like a sewer ditch. So I was in an inflatable raft in a ditch of nasty water with my friends, thinking I was Huckleberry Finn. Here, this daughter of immigrants that fled totalitarianism, her mother ate out of trash cans, was spending her summers on the Queen Elizabeth II. Thank you, America. Thank you, America. My grandmother, my dad's mom, her father was from New Zealand, fought in the Boer Wars, and came to the United States and trained horses. her mother was the granddaughter of the first governor of Oklahoma, I believe, Governor Steele. But Governor Steele was the grandson of an indentured servant. Whoa. And guess what? All of our families have these stories, right? All of these families have these stories. My grandpa on my mom's side, his mom was a German immigrant. And my grandpa's dad bounced. But he worked for the railroad and had an amazing career. And, worked at the railroad from like 17 to 50. And now he's in his 90s. Hasn't worked since then because that great railroad retirement. And as like an actor, does plays into his 90s. This is this beautiful country. But because we have very small problems, we make very big problems. We love each other. We're seeking to be divided on genders that don't exist, which is insane. I went to Starbucks. They had more flags at Starbucks than the United Nations, but they were all for different sexual identities. It was absolutely crazy. Go looking at Starbucks in their window, and they have, maybe June is over. Maybe they took it down, but they had the flags of, you think these are the flag. Some of them are very pretty flags, by the way. They have like really nice colors, but they represent nothing, and they're insane, and they're dividing us along lines that are non-existent. So much so that a young man at Columbia looks a North Korean refugee in the face and begins to cry because she didn't recognize his flag, his gender. She mispronounced him, and his gender, she said, was they. I don't even understand what they is. I think they means if means you need to go see a psychiatrist. That's what that means. That's not what I think it means. That's what it means. So I'm going to interview John Zmirak here on the first ever 4th of July special, and we're going to talk about Catholic integralism. John Zmirak confessed to me recently that he had been, I didn't know this, he had been a Catholic integralist. If you were a Catholic integralist, you are not allowed to eat hot dogs today or watch fireworks. No, you need to put on a Silas, go into your basement and whip yourself. That's what you need to do today. No Catholic integralists eat hot dogs. There's no apple pie, and there is no fireworks for you. Well, John Zmirak was a Catholic integralist, and we are not letting them destroy this republic. No. Every generation's had its kooky challenges, right? Every generation. This is absurd. Gender ideology is absurd, but you know what's even more absurd? The segregation, right? That's more absurd. You know what's even more absurd than segregation? Slavery. Okay. Every generation has its absurdities. We should not have a defeated mentality. This is going to be very easy to beat. And in fact, the cancel culture, which is an emanation of the culture of death, is being beaten back. This illiberal attitude, that's the rejection of freedom that we see even in Christians with integralism, is going to be beaten back. It's just ridiculous. Ideologies of evil are deprivations. They will cease to exist on their own. But we want to hasten their demise because we want to leave our children a beautiful culture of life. I want to share one other story just about how great my experience is with this wonderful country. I'm going to share with you 2 more stories. You're like, God, Jason, you are meandering today. I just love my country. And half our audience, we have tens of thousands of listeners, half our audience is outside of this country. Okay, so I want to share with you 2 stories. One for those outside of this country and one of those inside this country. So a buddy of mine from Iraq, very prominent guy, actually was a big in the tech industry in Iraq before our senseless regime change war shattered the country and allowed ISIS to come in and run amok. And now he is a journalist. My buddy came to this country because of his role in the Iraqi government prior to the invasion. He thought he'd never be able to come here, but he got to come here for a funeral of a friend's father. And we got to spend a lot of time together in the United States, in D.C. and Pennsylvania and Texas. And I had asked my friend, I said, brother, what's the thing most surprising about America? And if you listen to the show, I probably tell the story more than anything, any story ever. He said, do you know what was most surprising? I thought I would be hated. I thought I would be hated. He kind of looks like Saddam Hussein, by the way. Really handsome guy, big mustache. He goes, I thought I'd be hated, I thought he'd be waterboarded at the airport. Like, this is what's in his mind. And he said, but the truth is, by the end of my first day here, I realized I felt more at home in the United States than in any other country I've been to in the world, including all of the Middle Eastern countries I've lived in. And I feel more at home in the United States than even most places and neighborhoods in Iraq. This is the truth. This is our country. This is who we are. This is really who we are. Now, are there people that bring prejudices and bigotry? Yes, I want to share a story that was kind of funny in the Lin-Manuel movie, In the Heights. There is a scene where a girl tells a story about being at this fancy dinner at Stanford. And she's at this dinner as a student, but because she's Latina, one of the big donors said to her, are you going to clear our plates? Because she thought, because all the staff there was Latina, that she was the staff, okay? And she told the story as a devastating story. Do you know the same thing happened to my daughter? I was giving a speech at a big fancy event, and my daughter at the time was a Mission Corps volunteer, so she was dressed. You don't know what that is, but she was dressed like they dress, which is very kind of traditional and Latina and black. Like she was wearing a black dress and these black shoes, and she looked like the rest of the banquet waitresses. And she's Filipina and Haole. I'm Haole, if you don't know. Haole's white. And so she's jalapeno. And she was standing at the back of the room listening to her father speak, and a woman came up to her and said, are you just going to stand there, or are you going to pour our drinks? Here I am, this big event. I'm the keynote speaker. And how did my daughter respond? She said, well, yeah, I would love to pour your water, but can I wait till my father's done speaking first? And we laughed about it. Now my daughter said, well, I was more mad than my daughter. She goes, Dad, look around. I'm dressed like the other girls. I look like the other girls. It was a natural assumption. So, that was one of the scenes in the Heights, in a movie I love, which was supposed to kind of show us how racism works. Whatever. If you think that's if that's what's upsetting you, you need to travel the world. You need to travel the world. So let's bring John Zmirak on. That was long, meandering introduction, just my way of saying I love this great country. I love it. I love traveling the world. I love traveling the world as an American because, as an American, it's different. You go here, you go there, it's different. One more story. I was invited to a conference by the Holy Father about a decade ago, Pope Benedict, and to represent the United States in a meeting of media elite and influencers. And so Steve McAvity and I were representing the United States. Steve produced The Passion of the Christ. Eduardo Verástegui was there representing Mexico with a billionaire from Mexico. And everyone else from the old world was like royalty, literally royalty or billionaires. And I remember thinking, even my own church treats regular old folks, regular plain American citizens, different than they would treat a German or someone from France or someone from, anywhere else in Europe. That they hold American citizens on the same level as the elite from other places in the world. And that's something that's magnificent. And that is the beauty of America. So happy Independence Day. Now let's bring on this recovering integralist, John Zmirak. This episode is being brought to you by Divided Hearts of America, my movie with Benjamin Watson. Go to movietomovement.com to see where you can see this film, but you can see it wherever you download films. So put Divided Hearts of America in Redbox or Amazon or wherever you download films. It's there. And if you want to know the secret to unite this beautiful republic, the secret has been with us since July 4th, 1776. It's the inviolable dignity of the human person, not just here in the United States, but around the world. See, July 4th started a global revolution. It told the world that political communities exist to protect the person. And every person has an equal dignity. All right, so let's get on with the show with the one, the only. You waited 24 minutes to hear from the wonderful the marvelous, the great John Zmirak on The Jason Jones Show. John Zmirak, welcome to The Jason Jones Show.
Thank you, Jason, and happy Independence Day, while that's still a legal holiday.
Yeah, I know. I think it's remember that movie Steve McAvity produced, American Carol? It came out way before its time. I need to promote that.
I never saw it.
Oh,
it's
amazing. It's Independence Day becomes illegal. It's like Michael Moore campaigns against Independence Day.
Wow. I think they have set us up for that with this Juneteenth holiday. Now, on its own merits, Juneteenth is a lovely day to celebrate. It's when slaves in Texas found out about the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was a spontaneous, organic celebration of the end of one of the great evils in history, which had existed all around the world and which the U.S. got rid of within about 90 years of being founded. It still existed in most of the rest of the world. But I think Juneteenth is going to be turned into kind of annual purge where urban youths are allowed to riot and the police won't do anything. But that is held up as the replacement summer holiday for the 4th of July, which is increasingly being canceled. The flag is being canceled. An anthem is being canceled. The National Archives are apologizing.
No. John, so let me tell you what I think. No way that's going to happen. I think the counteroffensive is already moving forward against that kind of woke nonsense. I really believe that Juneteenth will be, and we need to make it a celebration of the Republican Party and lead to the Democrat Party being canceled. If any institution in America should be canceled, slavery, segregation, abortion, internment camps, terror weapons dropped on civilian city centers, that's the Democrat Party. Juneteenth is a Republican holiday, and we need to own it. That's what I went to a Juneteenth event this year. And the only it was in a black neighborhood, and I was what state was I even? I don't even remember. Oh, I was in Virginia. The only elected officials I saw there were Republicans. Now BLM was there.
That's great. I think Juneteenth is inherently a good thing, and I'm glad on the merits. I don't want. I know what the left is going to try.
Oh
to
yeah.
The way they turn June into Pride Month, and in Australia, the whole summer is now Pride season. So if they can make sodomy into a national holiday that turns into a whole season, don't put it past them that they can corrupt Juneteenth.
Oh, they'll try. They will try. But this is 4th of July. Every generation has its obstacles to face down, right? And I obviously we're facing down woke culture. But I am very confident that we're going to battle back woke culture. And I see the real battle is not against like BLM. I think it's against spoiled, rotten white kids from affluent suburbs. These are the real spreaders of wokeness that are disgusting. Did you see the video I sent you of the girl that escaped North Korea, went to Colombia? She made a video about how North Korea was less crazy than Ivy League universities with their wokeness.
Oh, no, that's great.
And she tells a story. Yeah, I want the stream to do something about it. I want to try to get an interview with her. I already texted Steve Bannon today. He's had her on. But this young woman tells the story about being at Columbia. This girl taught herself perfect English, and she's at Columbia. She walked through the Gobi Desert to her freedom, and she's at Columbia now, where a spoiled, rotten little rich white punk kid begins to cry and says, "How dare you misgender me, use my wrong pronoun, you'll never know what it's like to be oppressed." These kids are the menace that we need to smack down, smack back. And
I think maybe we should be, to be kind to these people, we should carry cyanide pills for them. I'm sorry. If your suffering is just too much, here you go.
All right. So it's 4th of July. This is the first annual 4th of July special, which I said I did the longest introduction. We probably have 4 listeners right now. I just ranted about how much I love this country and told a bunch of stories like an old man. on 4th of July on the porch with the sweet tea. But I made it clear this is the first annual 4th of July special with John Zmirak. And you know what does that mean? When it's the first annual, it means it's an aspiration. It'll probably never happen again. But this is my aspiration. And
why not? I'm always looking for something valuable to do to commemorate our nation's founding.
There you have it.
And it seems like a good way to do it. I'm also going to sit back with my girlfriend and we're going to watch that classic musical 1776, which I watched growing up and just loved. And it's more poignant than now ever. More poignant now than ever. Who would have thought that we would have seen such widespread rejection of the founding principles of this great and good nation on the left and on the far right at the same time? We at the stream we did two pieces for the weekend. We're imagining America in 5 years, which will be its 250th anniversary. We're imagining how will the 4th of July be marked in 5 years if things go very well and if things go very badly. And my colleague Al Perota wrote a really lovely piece that in the voice of a Hispanic Republican female congresswoman elected in the 2024 backlash to the woke madness, talking about the restoration of patriotism and how the woke movement went away like a bad tide, and how all Americans united around the founding principles of this country, which are grounded in natural law, in medieval resistance to tyranny, in the Christian and biblical view of the human person, and in natural rights grounded in the dignity of man as the image of God. And it was a lovely piece. Of course, I volunteered to write the piece if things go very badly. So my piece is called, it's like in Kamala Harris's America with 3 Ks in America. And the person whose voice I speak through is a former Republican congressman who, when Kamala Harris, on grounds of national security, declared the creation of a one-party state. There would only be one party, the anti-racist party. And Republicans who are willing to sign on to its principles can sign on and become the right fringe, the controlled opposition to the one-party anti-racist state. This congressman refused to do that, and so he was banned not just from social media but from the internet. He can't even get on at internet cafes when he shows his vaccine passport because, of course, COVID 2026 is allegedly raging. He basically has to live off the grid and do yard work to make a living because his bank accounts have been canceled, the way Wells Fargo canceled those of Lauren Witzka, a former Republican Congress candidate, and a journalist who wrote in support of her. They both had just had their bank accounts canceled by Wells Fargo. No access to their money. They have to fight to get their money back just because of their politics.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Now, I'm with Al Perota on my optimism, but I do agree that we're in the dark, innermost cave of this battle. It might get a little darker, but I think we're about to erupt out of this.
I hope you're right. I want to, in light of the president's recent remarks about terrorizing the population with F-15s and nuclear weapons, I would like to find a gun range in Texas where I could use my AR-15 to practice shooting at F-15. Because it sounds like that's what the Democrats have in mind.
Yeah, that's not probably going to work very well. I mean, I know how to do it. You know, this is what they taught us in the infantry. It's sort of like when a nuclear bomb blast comes, you know, they would change the policy. They would get new field manuals every year. One year it would be like ass to the blast. And then the next year they would, you know, you put your weapon underneath you and and then the next year they'd say, no, you actually face the blast with your Kevlar helmet. You're like, yeah, okay. It really doesn't matter. Well, they taught us that when, you know, the Soviets came at us with their jets, we'd lie flat, all of us, horizontally, and fire up, like in the line, hoping.
Well, you know what? Actually, after Biden, the context was he was saying Americans think that having AR-15s would stop tyranny. Well, you'd need some nuclear weapons and some F-15s to do that. And someone posted the best meme. in response to that. They just did a picture of a Viet Cong soldier smiling at the camera.
Oh,
or he could have done a Taliban soldier.
Yeah, it's pretty good. That's pretty
They
good.
can't rule. They can't fill the army with trannies and Karens. Kick out all the evangelical Christians and conservative Catholics. What'll be left?
And,
right?
and Mormons. And
Mormons, drive them around.
thuggy kids like me from broken homes that love this country. Yeah, good luck with that.
Because they've identified evangelicals and conservative Catholics as violent extremists. That's in an Army manual for counter-extremist training. They've identified basically anyone who would bother to sign up for the military as an extremist. So they're going to use this army full of trannies and Karens. They won't be able to pacify an Afghanistan the size of the continental United States. If they want to try that, fighting block by block in cities like Dallas.
No, they cannot. Obviously, it's absurd. We couldn't pacify Iran. Like we couldn't. This talks about the neocons, right. And I want to get to your. I revealed in the introduction that John Zmirak, which I never knew, God forbid, once was an integralist. And I said, John, and I want to restate this in the intro. If you are an integralist, you are not allowed to celebrate 4th of July. You need to listen to this podcast 3 times in a row, go into your basement, put on a Silas and whip yourself with a hanger. That's it. That's no apple pie, no hot dogs, no fireworks for you. But John, let's go to that. Let's talk about integralism. We've done this before, but I want to do it from the perspective that you once rejected the American founding, like Scott Hahn and many other prominent public Catholics are doing today shamelessly in the public.
Right. In my defense, I was 17.
All right. I expected more from a 17-year-old John Zmirak, but okay.
Well, at 17, I arrive at Yale. Half the people are wearing little pink triangle buttons. This is supposed to be America's elite, and I see, this is what America has turned into. Maybe it was bad all along. And that is the instinct the integralists have. And then the next step in your head is, this must be fixed. If this is so bad, it would legitimate using force, using censorship, creating a kind of authoritarian government the way they had in Spain. But of course, Franco's Spain did not outlast Franco. And the moment he was gone, the church, which had gotten in bed with his regime, everybody left. When the church aligns itself with state power, when the church becomes like a branch of the DMV or the post office or the parole office, it gets all the resentment that people have towards the government. People have resentment for the government because the government uses violent coercion. And ideally, you want as little violent coercion used against citizens as absolutely necessary. That non-aggression principle, which libertarians talk about, is 90% true. I mean, it is mostly true. When you see people coming out of a church whose doctrines you disagree with, let's say hardcore Calvinist church. I was at a conference a few weeks ago of hardcore Calvinists who were organizing against wokeness infiltrating the churches. And I disagree with these people on some fundamental things about the nature of God and free will. But, the answer to that is not to fantasize the police rounding them up and forcing them to change their views or pretend to violate their consciences and become hypocritical pseudo-Catholics who just repeat Orthodox slogans in case the listening devices are on in their hotel room. The Soviet Union circa 1982 should not be the fantasy that Christians have of what a good government would be like. But here I think a recent sad but predictable event tells us why people are falling into integralist totalitarian fantasies.
Before we get into that, I made the mistake, John. I made the mistake earlier of not defining integralism. People listen to the show a lot; they've heard it before. But would you define integralism just briefly?
Sure. Integralism says that we all agree the government should work for the common good. They believe the common good includes salvation of souls, that the government is competent to decide among the claims of various Christian churches and enforce those of the Catholic Church on everyone, that a Catholic state should censor the media, should prohibit Protestant public worship, ideally, if it can get away with it. Their term for that is prudence. That means what we can get away with. Ideally, only Catholic churches should be legal. Every bishop has jurisdiction over every baptized person in his diocese, including the children of Protestants. So in theory, and historically this has happened in practice, the bishop has the right to take the children away from Protestants so that they can be raised as Catholics. Because when they were baptized as Catholic. Why leave them in a home where their souls are going to be abused and they're going to be taught heresy that could endanger their eternal salvation? So in theory, Cardinal Kupich or Cardinal Tobin of New Jersey, 99 Baby, could take away the kids from the Protestants in his diocese and send them to Catholic orphanages so that they can be raised as Catholic. Or, of course, as we know, they will be raped by gay Jesuits. But, in theory, somehow, the church, which you can't trust to run a boys' school, can be entrusted to re-educate all the children of every Protestant or Orthodox in the diocese. So integralism is a Catholic version of 1984. They reject the freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the sovereignty of parents, the sanctity of the family. And if you press these people, they won't deny it. Ask them, was Pius IX right or wrong to take away Edgardo Mortaro, who was a Jewish boy of a religious Jewish family, but one of the servants thought he was dying, so she baptized him. Pius IX had the papal police come take the kid away. The kid was put under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition for a while, and then Pius XII took him into the Vatican and raised him like his own son. Was that right or was that wrong? Louis XV, when he persecuted the Huguenot Protestants against the wishes of the Pope at the time, by the way, who violently condemned this persecution, but never mind. Louis XV persecuted the Protestants of France, and he took children of Protestants away and gave them to the bishop to find new homes for them so that they could be raised Catholic. This is integralism. It is like North Korea with a scapular.
Yeah, no, and they admitted to me in public. Okay, so that was longer than a one sentence definition, but that said.
I'm sorry. I could give you one sentence.
Okay, one sentence.
Integralists believe the state can use violent coercion to enforce religious orthodoxy.
That's it. That's right. Like the woke culture. My biggest problem with the integralists is they're simply conforming to the spirit of the age. And many of these schmucks are the same people that were neoconservative Catholics, whatever that meant, in 2004, that were hissing at us for not supporting a ridiculous regime change war in Iraq that we knew, that we stated, that we were clear about would lead to ethnic cleansing of our co-religionists. And it happened. These are the same people.
It led to a genocide of Christians where 3/4 of a community that had been there since the time of the apostles were either killed or made refugees. These people didn't care because they were going to cocktail parties hosted by Pfizer where representatives of the Bush administration would come mutter something about family values before going to bomb some church that had been built.
Yeah, I would go to those. The good news is they're not allowed to sit down at those things. They're for some reason, they have to stand when you go to those dinners put on by Pfizer and Capitol Hill. You have to stand. You're not allowed to sit. That's illegal to sit. So there's no stools. So they're forced to suffer. So to me, they're LARPers, right? They're just LARPers that will never be engaged in authentic solidarity with the vulnerable. So in 2004, they're playing Risk. In 2021, they're playing Knights or whatever. They're medieval warfare.
Yeah, exactly. There actually was a war game from the 1970s called A Mighty Fortress, where you reenact the 30 Years' War
Ugh.
And one of the things is if you send your missionary into a city, he might convert the city or he might get burned at the stake.
That's
So
very
they're
clever.
playing
That's
the
very clever. So
yeah.
they went from Risk.
Yeah, they're playing
They went from Risk to what was it called?
A Mighty Fortress. It's an SPI game that reenacts the 30 Years' War, and I used to play it on the floor of my bedroom. But again, I was 17 years old.
The only game like that I ever got into was Diplomacy. Have you ever played Diplomacy?
Yeah, I'm terrible at diplomacy.
I've
because
never lost.
You only win by lying, and I have no poker face.
Do you know I've never lost? I have never lost a game of Diplomacy, and it infuriates people. What's great about Diplomacy is, there's no chance, and you win through deceit. And
yeah, I'm terrible at it.
So because I've never lost, my family and friends, their number one goal always is to conspire against me. But it's really easy to deceive them, that you trust them, so that when they're trying to deceive you, they're doing what you want. Does that make sense? So it's a game that even when everyone conspires against you, to me, it makes it actually easier to win. But I've never played any of those other games. But when I was in college, I heard that Henry Kissinger and Nixon would play this game. I'm like, okay, let me check this. And I love it. And it makes sense that Henry Kissinger and Nixon. I don't know if that's true.
George Bush at Yale used to play Risk in the dorm.
That makes sense.
And I'm sure that the neocons played Risk in the dorms too, because what is the lesson of Risk? You must control the Middle East at all costs. So that's stuck in their head.
Well, that goes back to early 19th century British, the birth of grand strategy is, control the Middle East, control Central Asia at all costs. Okay, so go on. I'm sorry.
I want to go to one more place though, because just before the weekend, the Supreme Court refused to hear the appeal of Baronelle Stutzman, the woman who had the floral shop, but because she was a Christian, she didn't want to decorate a gay wedding. And who's the guy, Phillips, who has the bake shop and didn't want to make a gay wedding cake? All three of Trump's appointees voted not to hear this appeal, giving religious liberty a chance against the LGBT juggernaut. I warned people that Amy Coney Barrett was probably going to be worthless, and I was right. And everybody told me to shut up because she was a nice Catholic girl with a lot of kids. She was Irish. She was part of our tribe, but she has voted not much better than Elena Kagan. Neither has Kavanaugh. Neither has Gorsuch. I'm sorry, Gorsuch voted to hear the appeal, but we're pretty sure, based on his Bostock opinion, he would have voted the other way. So only Clarence Thomas and Alito, they're the only two people really worthwhile having on the Supreme Court. So what does this tell you? Remember, as we celebrate the 4th of July, Independence Day, and to celebrate the original real principles on which America was founded, let's remember that the standing official legal interpretation of the U.S. Constitution of what liberty means is the one Anthony Kennedy handed down in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that the essence of American liberty is to look at the mystery of life and the mysteries of the universe and when life begins and what life means and shrug and say, I don't know, and that therefore we have the liberty to kill our children in the womb because the state is incompetent to decide even that human life in the womb has value. In other words, the official interpretation of the Constitution, because we have not fixed the court, through all the trouble of electing Trump, all the trouble of getting these people confirmed, has done absolutely nothing to fix this nihilistic vacuum, sucking the life out of all of us, sucking the unborn down the medical drains of 1,000 abortion clinics across the country. We have not rejected this fundamental nihilism that Anthony Kennedy foisted on us. If America means what America says it means as of now via its own Supreme Court, then it's not a good country. It's not a wholesome place. It's not based on natural law. It's not based on reason. It's not based on the Christian vision of the human person. So I think a lot of the integralists' inchoate wrath and unfocused rage is aimed at this false, disgusting, degenerate, corrupt interpretation of America that Anthony Kennedy and the court foisted on America, that all our institutions teach, and that Trump's own appointees apparently don't have that much problem.
Yeah, so they're attacking the same America the left is attacking. And by the way, it's there. I don't want us to be naive, right? So in the 19th century, in the early 19th century, the Supreme Court of Virginia said that Native Americans were not persons. The black slaves were not persons. This country, from its very beginning, has had its, first of all, the beauty of our documents. Thanks be to God. Grace, thanks be to God for the Declaration Principle written clearly there, the Constitution. But from the very beginning, I think Thomas Jefferson, he was good where the age was good. And it was, in many ways, a great age. He was bad where his age was bad. But then there were the heroes like John Adams and George Mason and others who transcended their age. And we could look back today and say, these are great men. Every era we've had this battle against the spirit of the age and against this revolutionary, the birth of our republic, which was this revolutionary belief of a republic founded to protect persons who are equal in dignity because they're made in the image of God. So the integralists and the woke knuckleheads, they can look and they can see the America. They can see the America that's no different than the rest of the world at that time in America, because the world's flowing into America. We're in the world. We're of the world. But what they don't see, what they refuse to recognize is, we're not allowed to say anymore, that talk about this American exceptionalism. They cannot see what is exceptional, what is unique, what is different. They will never look at that. It brings them shame, actually, to even acknowledge that it's there. And they, just like those who advocated segregation, slavery, denying the dignity of Native Americans, First Nation people, slaves, the child in the womb, they're the same as the people they reject. They're the same stream in American history. And by God's grace, John, I'm going to say it, not to sound proud. You and I, most people in this audience, I suspect, this great young woman, Miss Park from North Korea, we are part of a beautiful stream that goes right back, right through the civil rights movement, through the abolitionists, right to the Declaration of Independence, to John Adams, to George Mason. We're a stream. There's two streams. And they'll always be with us, right? We'll always have those who conform to the winds of the age.
Right. My point is the original founding was something good and godly that emerges from the proper principles of human rights that developed in the Christian tradition in the Middle Ages, that survived better in the English-speaking world than anywhere else because they didn't succeed in establishing an absolute monarchy in Britain. And ironically, when the English Protestants were rebelling against Charles I and Charles II and James II, who were trying to establish an absolute monarchy, these Calvinists had to draw on medieval Catholic principles of resistance to the state and the rights of the church against the state and the rights of believers against the government. This is Russell Kirk's argument in The Roots of American Order and America's British Culture. Two wonderful books. And I'd like to recommend another book by a friend of mine, Robert Riley. It's called America on Trial. And he wrote it in response to Patrick Deneen and other supporters of the integralist attack on the American founding. I am in no way criticizing the American founding. I am saying the American founding was hijacked by judges in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, where they pretended that America was founded on an absolute French Revolution-style secularism. It's a lie. It's just a falsification of the founding documents. And if you want a book that demonstrates that from the text, get Mark David Hall's book, Did America Have a Christian Founding? And he shows how the ACLU and the judges who were friendly to it systematically misread, distorted, selectively read, and lied about the founding of America. America was founded as a de facto Christian, tolerant Protestant country. with no established official church. But the assumption of the founders, and you can read this in their own words, was that the founding documents would always be interpreted through the prism of a Christian culture and a virtuous people, according to the virtue as defined by the Christian tradition. It was only in the 1960s that this radical secularism was accepted by our elites and imposed by our courts in defiance of the actual documents that the founders wrote and their actual expressed intentions in founding the United States. Do you know, people try to say that the American founding was a bunch of deists. The only person who was literally a deist among the founding fathers was Thomas Paine. And even he was insincere about it. He wrote Common Sense and other famous documents where he talked about divine providence and fasting and penitence. He was insincere, but he knew he was speaking to Christians. Thomas Jefferson was not a consistent deist because he talked about divine providence. He talked about divine retribution. Deists don't believe that. Benjamin Franklin was not a full deist. George Washington was not a deist. Deists don't do days of prayer and fasting on behalf of the country because they don't believe God intervenes in the universe. So the fact is there were maybe a couple of quasi-deists among the founding fathers, but they were 90% Calvinists, Augustinian Christians, with one famous Catholic, John Carroll. We need to see America was founded as a tolerant Christian nation with Protestant political culture based on Catholic theology of human rights from the Middle Ages.
You know, and we as Catholics, we often hear when, you know, the way you put it in some of your articles, that when you're at a party with Catholics after the third drink, you know, the crazy talk starts happening, and they'll lean in and they'll start talking about the Masons and persecution of Catholics. But our families fled here for relief.
Our families fled here from dictatorial Catholic countries often, where the church was corrupted by the state, and ordinary people didn't have a chance to make a living. Yep. And they came here and they were welcomed. The number of anti-Catholic incidents in American history, I mean, there are like four or five incidents in the whole history of the country. I love when people whine about America being anti-Catholic. And then you look at the time. 1848. Well, what was the condition of Protestants in Mexico? Their churches were illegal. 1870. What was going on? What was going on in the Papal States? Well, Jews were losing their kids to the Pope. They don't look at how intolerant the Catholic countries were at that time in history.
Well, and many of them are clamoring to return to intolerance, like they're the know-nothings prophecy come true. And by the way, like, look, my grandmother was anti-Catholic. Her husband was Catholic. But I'll be honest, like, she would talk and she would kind of have these like but her husband was Catholic. Not that there aren't bigotry in our culture and our history, sentiment, prejudices. All of our families have these things. But they act as like America, racism in America, anti-Catholic bigotry in America. Like as if America invented this, and if we were the worst example, instead of these are aberrations, or it's the flowering of progress in process, and we didn't go from the old world to the new world in one big leap to perfection utopia.
Religious bigotry in America stands out because it violates our founding principles. Religious bigotry didn't stand out in 19th century Mexico or Spain or Cuba because their principles didn't entail religious freedom. They had the Inquisition. The Inquisition existed in Cuba into the 1840s. And when the Spanish controlled Louisiana, there was a priest at what's the cathedral in New Orleans? I think it's I'm trying to think of the cathedral.
I was just there last week.
The Cathedral Parish of New Orleans. There was a Spanish priest setting up the Inquisition in New Orleans, but then Spain lost control of the province to France, and then it was sold to America. But there were Catholics trying to start the Inquisition on the North American continent. So judge people by the times in which they lived. And don't practice a pathetic double standard where if you look at, in 1700, Protestants were persecuting Catholics. Well, were Catholics persecuting Protestants? Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't count. Why? Because our religion is true. They sound like Muslims. They sound like Sharia Muslims. And
They sound like Islamists. They sounded like Islamists.
Islamists.
I was listening to a very popular podcast today on the Quran, and this very influential imam was saying that, look, God is more intolerant than us. He was talking to other Muslims, and he was talking about religious liberty, you know. And I'm going to try to get this guy on the show, but yeah, no, they sound like Islamists. They sound like crackpots, but they're teaching at like Franciscan University of Steubenville now. I mean, this is what's bizarre.
Well, now I've been pretty burned out on the Catholic subculture for a while. This is literally the last straw, Jason. I mean, I go to Mass on Sundays, and that's the extent of my interaction with the Catholic world because I can't be a part of this. I wrote a column at the Stream where I talked about this. These people are reacting psychologically to the catastrophe that is Pope Francis, to the collapse of the papacy. Let's just admit it. The papacy has collapsed. It no longer serves the function which it has served through the history of the church, that is reinforcing Orthodox doctrine. In fact, it has become a transmission belt for heresy, sodomy, and communism. That is a tremendous thing. That is a tremendous thing. I've been through my trauma. I have processed my trauma over Pope Francis. When he did the synod when he tried to rig the synod on the family to approve of gay marriage, when he turned annulments into even more of a farce than they were before. I mean, I think we're developing an app now called Sever, where you can annul your marriage on your cell phone. That's an exaggeration. More, it's a prediction. 5 years, we'll have Sever. I've processed my trauma, and the way I dealt with it was I have a now more realistic view of papal authority. That is, if it doesn't say ex cathedra, I don't care what the Pope says. It's interesting. You know, it's like, okay, what did Rachel Maddow say? But the Pope,
well, it's probably the same thing. That's all you need to know. It's probably the same thing. And well, the Pope waits to see what Rachel Maddow said, then he can restate it.
Right. But the thing is, you have to look back and say, okay, well, when Pope spoke off the cuff, when Pope spoke non-infallibly in the past, it had no more authority than when Francis gets up between Bono's speech and Chelsea Clinton's speech and makes remarks. So you have to pare back. Papal infallibility was declared in 1870. It leaked all over everything. We got to the point where every time the Pope said something, Catholics are supposed to treat it as presumptively infallible until proven otherwise. And that is ludicrous. That's what the Mormons do with their governing committee. That's turning the Pope into the Oracle of Delphi. Every time the Pope farts in the bathtub, it's not a divine revelation. It's kind of like, imagine if someone followed John Roberts around, and everything John Roberts said, publicly or privately, we were supposed to treat as presumptively American constitutional law. No, only when he writes for the majority opinion of the Supreme Court is it binding constitutional jurisprudence. Likewise, only when the Pope speaks ex cathedra or when he just repeats verbatim something that was previously taught infallibly by another pope or a council. Otherwise, it's just chatter that might be interesting, it might be true, but it might not be. Well, with Pope Francis blowing up the Vatican and us living in the rubble, one of the traumatized responses was integralism. If you remember, I think it was 1926, the Turkish government abolished the caliphate, the global authority for Sunni Islam. In response, some traumatized Muslims began the Muslim Brotherhood, which was an attempt by laymen to fill in, to step in for the authority that the caliphate used to exercise and to bring the caliphate back. And we saw ISIS try to do that in a much more violent way. The integralists are the Catholic answer to the Muslim Brotherhood, except, as you've pointed out, the Muslim Brotherhood are not a bunch of LARPers and wankers sitting around in their basement dressing up in medieval costumes. They're actually trying to do things, and sometimes in rather scary ways. But the integralists are imitating the Muslim Brotherhood and saying, well, clearly, any kind of compromise with the modern world, with principles of humanity and tolerance, that obviously destroys us. It destroyed the caliphate. It destroyed the papacy. We must go back, as laymen, to the most intolerant version of our religion that ever existed. And that rigid, intolerant creed is clearly the only thing that works. And it certainly helps us to feel better. And I think integralism mainly is a psychological defense mechanism where people feel a little stronger, their testosterone level inches up again for a while. They get to feel masculine and assertive when in fact they're powerless and not even influential. And there is no prospect of, in our lifetime, having a Catholic Pope again. Pope Francis has stuffed the College of Cardinals with a bunch of low IQ gay Jesuit types who are going to vote for a pale Xerox of Pope Francis. There's zero chance, barring a miracle, barring like a meteor hitting the papal conclave while a few Africans are still transferring flights into Qatar, we're going to get a pope worse than Pope Francis. And then the next one will probably be worse. How are these people going to sustain integralism, which says that bishops and the pope should be governing society through kind of puppet Catholic kings, when the Pope is a quasi-Marxist globalist who wants to censor the global media so you can't even criticize the vaccine that is made out of dead babies?
Yeah, no, it's
what
crazy.
A farce.
It's a farce, Jenna. I know you got a date, so before you go to your date, and I want to talk to you about two things. Number one is the neoconservatives was the rise of neoconservatism, which we didn't touch much, was something that pushed you toward integralism as a young man.
The neoconservatives offered a kind of fundamentalist, militant, insane interpretation of the American founding. That drove me kind of out of the mainstream conservative movement into the Catholic subculture. And I spent all my time interacting with fellow Catholics. And so I got a little narrow, and I kind of climbed into the ghetto because the neocons poisoned the conservative mainstream. But the integralists are now doing for Catholicism what the neocons did for Americanism. They're turning it into a nasty, bitter, partisan, intolerant, militant creed that I want nothing to do with.
Yeah, well, I think integralism will go the way of neoconservatism. I mean, where is neoconservatism? I mean, the loudest mouth Catholic neoconservatives are now on the left. Well, just same with other neoconservatives. They've just all sort of swung to the left, like nothing to see here. Let's wash my hands of all the blood. And to me, neoconservatism was never even a thoughtful philosophy or worldview. It was just sort of position papers rolled in amalgamation of position papers from Northrop Grumman and give me some other companies. If you took
neoconservatism, neoconservatism was like the Jack Chick version of America.
Yeah.
There are sophisticated Protestant thinkers. There are, John Calvin was very sophisticated, Melanchthon, Luther at times. But then you got Jack Chick tracts, which boiled everything down to nasty little poisonous caricatures. Neoconservatism took the whole American founding and made little Jack Chick pamphlets out of it and dropped it on Iraqi cities before bombing them.
And that new book by Scott Hahn, which I've blocked the name of it from my head, it read like a Jack Chick book. It was so thin and so embarrassing. I thought, how is Scott? I know Scott Hahn did not write this book, but how did he allow his name to go on this book? What was the title again?
Well, Brandon McGinley, a hack from the Catholic subculture, who has no visible means of employment and a stay-at-home wife and a bunch of kids.
What was the name of the book? It's Right and Just.
Right and Just.
It's Right and
Just.
Just.
And the actual author was Brandon McGinley, who's listed second for sales reasons. And I've read his other stuff, and he's kind of like the Mark Shea of the Inquisition reenactors.
So they're going to go away. They're going to go now. I want to talk about a movie, a musical. You gave us 1776. I am a huge Lin-Manuel fan, and I took my children to go see In the Heights. You're a New Yorker. I don't know if you saw Hamilton or Moana.
No.
Directed by the guy that directed Crazy Rich Asians. So I was not going to miss In the Heights. Amazing, beautiful. There's a little bit of like flourishes of kind of woke window dressing, but at the heart of it,
looked pretty woke to me.
Nah, but it's not. Okay, so it's about celebration of family, faith, community, and America is a place that everyone came to escape persecution for opportunity. Really beautiful. Now, they do have a little commercial in there for the DREAM Act, which I support the DREAM Act. And there's a commercial. You know, they always criticize Christian films for being lame, cheap propaganda with commercials in them. But, you know, there is a commercial for the DREAM Act in the middle of this musical, which I love. But do you know that the woke crowd has turned against In the Heights because they said there's not enough dark people of color. They're not dark
That's right.
enough.
Not enough black Dominicans. Yeah.
But like one of the leads is black. I don't understand. I'm like watching this going, the woke left cannot enjoy this beautiful movie that I, as a right-wing conservative Republican, adore. They're so addled by ideology that they're watching this beautiful film, this beautiful musical, and they're like, ugh, there's not enough black Dominicans in here. This is, and then Lin-Manuel says, I could have done better. He should have said, shove it.
Well, the thing is, it is a new religion, Jason. Wokeism is a new religion. It is a Christian heresy that has original sin, but only for white people. And it has condemnation. It has guilt. It has predestination. It has everything except redemption, forgiveness, or Jesus. So imagine Calvinism minus Jesus, and you've got the woke cult.
It's a really
everyone is predestined to be damned except for the elect who happen to be members of various sexual or ethnic minorities, and they can do no wrong because the only wrong is racism, and only white people can be racist. It is so stupid, but it's so seductive and powerful in our culture right now. It is every bit as stupid as the segregationist rants of George Wallace. But those were popular in Alabama in 1962, and this garbage is popular now. And we should mock this false religion, mock its priests of Baal, blaspheme its pieties. Tell them I just tell these people, kiss my black Irish ass.
Well, and it infantilizes. It's funny. So I sat down with my family after we watched this, and somehow my wife said something about minorities. And then my kids were like, what's a minority? And my daughter's like, and my wife is like, well, you would be considered minorities. And then my son laughed and he goes, that's funny. Wait, what? How are we minorities? And my wife's like, well, because you're mixed. You're half Chinese, you're half white. I'm like, yeah, if you went to Stanford, you would be a minority. There's a scene, I think I talked to you about this. There's a scene in the Heights where this young woman goes to Stanford and she is at a dinner with big benefactors. And one of the benefactors looks at her and asks her to like clear the plates because she thinks she's a waitress. And the very same thing happened to my daughter. I think I told you the story. I was speaking to a group of very affluent, influential people in Washington, D.C. My daughter was a Mission Corps volunteer at the time, so she was dressed like a Latina because that's how they dress, this sort of traditional clothing. So she, she looked, right out of 1930s Spain or Mexico. And she's half Filipino. She's, and she was standing on the back wall, and one of these ladies, dripping in her jewelry, turned to my daughter and said, will you fill her water? Are you going to fill her waters or just stand there? And my daughter's like, yeah, I would love to fill your waters, but can I finish listening to my dad speak first? And I was much more upset than my daughter. My daughter was not angry at all. And I was like, who is this? Let me talk to this lady. She's like, Dad, well, look at how I'm dressed. Look at me and look at the other waitresses, the other banquet waitresses. Like I look like a banquet waitress right now. It's nothing to be upset about.
And there's nothing wrong with being a banquet waitress. That's the funny thing.
That's what the father said to the young girl in the Heights. When the daughter told him the story, he said, well, there's nothing wrong with being confused with a banquet waitress, dear. That's exactly what the dad said.
My grandmother was a semi-literate Irish maid who scrubbed floors on her hands and knees to try to survive in the Great Depression. My mother was one of 11 kids, only 5 of whom lived to adulthood because of malnutrition and disease in the Great Depression in New York City. These people act like anybody white who's not a coal miner inherited a legacy from the Habsburg monarchy. They are simply at a different stage in climbing the American ladder than we are at the moment. It's not injustice. It's called reality. We live in a fallen world with scarce resources, and people who don't inherit money have to earn it somehow. And at some stage, virtually everybody who's not related to Prince Charles has waitresses and maids and gas station attendants and coal miners and potato farmers in his ancestry. And if you're not a spoiled wannabe aristocrat, you're not embarrassed by that.
No, we're proud of it, right? I think we're all proud of having. By the way, there's another scene where, yes, there's an old lady who sings about her mother being a maid in the Depression in New York. We're all very proud of our ancestors that they got up and got here. I was just listening to another podcast, and this podcast host was saying, America has aggressively been stealing the brains of the world for decades. No, we're not stealing. We're saying, hey, come over here. It's better. Escape. Run for your life. And most people, they're like, nah, I don't got that in me. I'm just going to hang out here. Yep. And then these exceptional ones are like, really? I'm on my way. Have you seen Brooklyn?
The place?
No, I don't know if it was a play. It was a novel and then a movie. It's called Brooklyn. No, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah. The movie.
I have been to Brooklyn.
No, there's a movie called Brooklyn. It's about an Irish immigrant who comes to America, falls in love with an Italian boy, and goes back to Ireland and thinking, she misses home, and she goes back, and she realizes that if she were to stay there, there's no upward mobility, nothing has changed. She's romanticized the place, and she goes back to Brooklyn and marries the Italian boy.
I will see that. That sounds like a good thing. Well, Jason, I need to run. I need to go to the German immigrant deli where I buy most of my groceries in Highland Park, Dallas, and it's still got lots of wonderful German food. You live in a German city in Texas. We're all very happy about the diversity in America, provided it's based on unity around the founding principles of the Constitution and the Declaration. Because if you take those away, it's going to be like Yugoslavia, and my family left Yugoslavia for a reason. Happy Independence Day, Jason.
All right, have fun on your date, John. God bless. Happy Independence Day.
Bye-bye.
I love the way John ended it. I need to have John Gravino on and talk about his article because I am very hopeful. And as crazy as the woke ideology seems, it is really less crazy or equally as crazy as the ideologies that had flourishes in the 19th and 20th century, these ideologies of evil. So instead of like sitting here and going, whoa, things are so bad, nah, they're not so bad. It's normal. There are ideologies and enthusiasms and eruptions in every age. We're small-souled people with thin lips and clammy hands, lust for unearned wealth and power to control others. And then there's always a smaller minority of folks who are noble and have dignity and courage and are thoughtful to the common good and are too proud to kneel and serve diminished ideologies and the high priests of these bizarre cults and resist. And that's us. That is us. And this is why I love 4th of July. As John said, there is only one principle of unity in our great republic. We are the only nation in the history of the world founded on anthropology, founded on a vision of the human person, and that is smack there in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, where it is laid out. It is really a Christian vision of the human person from revealed truth that we are endowed by God with inalienable rights. Why? Because we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are equal in dignity. All of us. And those of us who are American are blessed to live in this wonderful republic. In the intro, sorry for that long intro. In that long intro, I talked about my friend from Iraq. You know, when I was taking him to the airport and he was going home, he said, you know, I will never be able to live in the United States. I would actually love to live in the United States. They'll never let me live here. He said, but you know what? That's okay. Because I have captured, I am stealing this beautiful idea of what it is to be an American, and I'm putting it in my heart, and I'm taking it with me. You know, the world is filled with people. In every nook and every cranny of the planet Earth, there are beautiful people that assent to the truth of the equal dignity of the other. We hear these stories all of the time of Muslims fighting to defend Yazidis or hiding and protecting Jews, Jews protecting and fighting for Palestinians. We hear these stories all the time, right? From Africa, from these are the people that assent to the truth of the human person and how the human family should organize itself. But those of us who live in the United States of America literally live in the only political community in the history of the world that this noble impulse that is in all of us naturally, all over the world. We're the only ones blessed to live in a political community that is organized around assenting to the truth about the human person. And so, you know what I say? I'm gonna quote Miss Park, and I'm gonna put her speech in the show notes. Please watch it and share it with everyone. She said, I was a slave, I'll never be a slave. I was never a slave, I will never be a slave. Okay? She said she is going to fight for this country. She's going to fight against cancel culture. She is willing to be deplatformed. You know, this show, we don't even promote we're on YouTube because I don't want to support YouTube. We just throw the show up on YouTube. This show, this harmless little show, was canceled from YouTube this week. Can you believe it? We have never promoted it, never shared it, never emailed it to anyone, never put it on social media. It was just another place. If people Googled it, they happen to find it. We happen to get 3,000 subscribers without ever once promoting it. And people did listen to it there. Well, now you can't because we've been canceled from YouTube. Well, who cares, right? We will be relentless. We will be clever. We will have joy. We will celebrate. We will be happy warriors. We will fight with a smile. And like my man Andrew Breitbart, and we will save this republic, and we will share this vision of the human person to every corner of the planet Earth. All right? This episode is being brought to you by Movie to Movement. Movie to Movement is an amazing nonprofit that I founded. It's a program of Hero Inc., but you know it as Movie to Movement, movietovmovement.com. We have been involved in over 50 films. Our most recent film, Divided Hearts of America with Benjamin Watson, reveals the secret that will unite us. We've just been talking about that. Go to movietovmovement.com or download it everywhere. And the show's been brought to you by the Vulnerable People Project, standing in solidarity with the vulnerable. You know, being an American, living in a constitutional republic, our hegemon, our interests as a nation state bump up against everyone in the world. And in some places we cause trouble. In other places we defend the vulnerable. Well, what the Vulnerable People Project seeks to do is advance the interests that this republic bumps up against to make sure their interests are being heard. Vulnerable ethnic and religious minorities, the child in the womb. It's a very unique organization that punches way above its weight. Go to thegreatcampaign.org and you can be a part of the nonprofit that punches above its weight more than any nonprofit in the world today. Become a monthly donor. Go to thegreatcampaign.org. And it is 4th of July. My Pillow. If you're not sleeping on a My Pillow pillow on the 4th of July, you're letting yourself down. That's a celebration in and of itself. We have a new deal we're going to be announcing later this week. But right now, you go to mypillow.com, use the code Jones, check it out. There's a lot of new products and a lot of deep discounts with the code Jones. And we've got an exciting new offer with My Pillow coming in the next show. In the next show, you'll hear about it. All right? go eat some apple pie. Unless you're an integralist, lock yourself in the basement. Until next time, it's the Jason Jones Show.
This has been the Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.